The recent military clash between India and Pakistan, it's been on a scale we really haven't seen in decades. It seemed to overshadow even the Kargil War.
Absolutely. We saw these rapid tit-for-tat actions building up, didn't we? And it all culminated in Pakistan launching Operation Banyan-ul-Marsis on May 10th.
And in these kinds of situations, the first reports you get are always, or, well, fragmented, right?
Yeah, exactly. Bits and pieces, potential bias, lots of claims and counterclaims flying around about downed planes, drones, even these big power outages. It makes getting a clear picture really, really tough at first.
That's precisely why we wanted to dive into this today. Our mission really is to try and understand the sequence of events and figure out what was behind Pakistan's seemingly quite bold military moves.
Especially considering India's actions just before, like the, pretty significant missile strike on the Nirkan Air Force Base near Islamabad.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been digging through news reports, analyses, trying to piece together a clearer timeline, identify what the key drivers were here.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe back around May 7th.
Sounds good. That's when we first heard about this air engagement where India reportedly uh, took some losses. Although there were the initial denials, efforts to control the narrative on social media, which is, well, fairly standard procedure these days.
It is, yeah. But things rarely stay hidden for long, especially now. So after that, around May 8th, it looks like India shifted tactics, started using these Harap drones.
Right, the Hiraks. Apparently quite expensive, something like $700,000 each.
That's the figure reported, yeah. And then Pakistan came out saying they achieved total interception.
Total interception. Against drones like that, that sounds ambitious.
Huh.
Is 100% even realistic?
Well, achieving a perfect score against any kind of aerial threat is, let's say, highly improbable. But what really ramped things up was May 9th.
Ah, yes, the missile attack.
Yeah.
Directly on Nirkan Air Force Base in Rawalpindi.
And Nirkan is, what, only about 12 kilometers from Islamabad? Striking that close to the capital?
Yeah.
That's a major, major escalation.
Definitely. And it wasn't just Nirkan, was it? There were reports about other bases, too. Shorka, Mirid, even a C-130 transport plane supposedly damaged.
And perhaps the most worrying part, though it's still unconfirmed, was the claim India might have used ballistic missiles.
Oof, yeah. Between nuclear powers launching ballistic missiles, that's walking a very thin line. So much room for miscalculation.
It really is. The ambiguity about the warhead, it just instantly escalates the danger. If that did happen, a strong response was almost guaranteed.
Which brings us right to Pakistan's Operation Banyan-ul-Marsis, starting May 10th. They called it a limited response, didn't they?
Yeah.
And focused primarily on Kashmir.
That focus on Kashmir is key. From Pakistan's perspective, of course, the status of Kashmir is disputed.
Right.
So by keeping the operation geographically limited to that region, they could perhaps argue it wasn't a full-on attack on India proper, maybe leaving some room potentially for de-escalation later on.
Okay, so let's unpack their strategy. The first thing that jumped out were those reports of widespread power outages in northwest India. It was a bit unexpected.
It was. There was some early talk, social media speculation about Pakistani cyber attacks crippling maybe 70% of India's grid.
70%.
Yeah.
That sounds huge. Is that even feasible with India's power setup?
Extremely unlikely, I'd say. India's grid isn't one monolithic thing. It's very decentralized, lots of independent operators. Taking down 70% nationally via cyber means that would be an incredibly tall order, probably beyond even India's own offensive cyber capabilities, let alone Pakistan's.
Okay, so maybe not a massive cyber attack,
Yeah.
but it does seem like there were power cuts in several northwestern regions. So what's a more likely cause?
Well, a more plausible scenario is targeted strikes, perhaps using missiles or drones, against specific electrical substations and transmission nodes in those key areas near the border.
Oh, okay. And strategically, that makes a lot of sense, right?
Mhm.
Knocking out power to Indian air bases.
Precisely. Air bases need reliable power. For everything alert aircraft, air defense systems like radar and missile launchers, they have backup generators, sure, but there's always a switch over time. Even a short disruption creates a window of vulnerability.
A window Pakistan could exploit. Which leads us neatly into the next phase. The airstrikes with their JF-17 jets.
Right. Reports suggest they used JF-17s launching air-to-ground missiles, maybe some drones too, hitting targets like air defense sites and runways at Rajouri, Udhampur, and Srinagar air bases.
The goal being, presumably, to suppress any quick Indian retaliation and weaken their military posture in those forward areas.
Seems likely, yes. And here's where it gets particularly interesting. There was this specific claim that a Pakistani JF-17 used a Chinese HD-1A supersonic cruise missile.
A Chinese missile.
Yeah, and apparently developed by a private Chinese company, which is noteworthy in itself. The claim is it destroyed an Indian S-400 air defense system at Udhampur.
Wow, an S-400 taking one of those out would be
Yeah.
absolutely massive. That's top-tier kit. Very expensive.
It really is. And India doesn't have many. They ordered 5. Reports suggest only 3 were delivered. They need them for the Pakistan border, the China border, defending Delhi. Losing one is a significant blow to their high-end air defense capability.
A major gap opens up. Were there other losses reported from those strikes?
There were some unconfirmed reports, yes, suggesting other Indian aircraft might have been destroyed on the ground during those airfield attacks. Hard to verify for sure.
Okay. And then there's the strike on the BrahMos missile storage site at the B's base.
Correct. The BrahMos is a serious threat joint Russian-Indian project. Supersonic, flies low, good range. Definitely a worry for Islamabad, given how close B's is to the border.
So taking out that storage facility would be a priority. Reports said it suffered heavy damage.
That was the claim, yes. Neutralizing that threat makes sense. And alongside the air attacks, we heard about heavy artillery and missile bombardment on the ground.
What were they using there?
Reports mentioned Chinese SH-15 truck-mounted howitzers. Those are 155mm systems, and also Pakistan's own Fat-1 tactical missiles.
Flatay. Isn't that based on a Chinese design, too?
Believed to be, yes. A derivative of the Chinese WS-2 multiple rocket launcher system. They apparently use these to hit Indian border fortifications, troop positions, supply points pretty hard.
And there were claims of significant losses for some Indian units, the 15th Corps, 9th Division.
That was reported, yes. If true, it would seriously disrupt India's strategy of, gradually changing facts on the ground with those border fortifications. A real setback.
And all this happening under air cover. Pakistani jets overhead.
Apparently so. J-10Cs and F-16s reported flying cover over Kashmir. There was even that one unconfirmed report about another Indian Rafale being shot down, pilot captured. A female pilot, the story went.
Yeah, I saw that. But unconfirmed, you say?
Very much so. And honestly, given what seems to have happened on May 7th with Pakistan's far-shot capability, you have to wonder if India would even risk flying their top jets like the Rafale that close to the border at that point. But it does show Pakistan's confidence in controlling the air.
Okay, so that brings us back to a really key question. Why this time? Why such a forceful response from Pakistan? After the 2019 Indian airstrike, their reaction was much more defensive, more restrained. What changed?
Exactly. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it really seems to point back to that air battle on May 7th.
The one where India reportedly lost aircraft.
Yes. The Pakistani Air Force actually held a press conference about it on May 9th. They laid out their timeline, detecting an Indian buildup early morning, scrambling their own jets, and crucially, changing their rules of engagement.
How so?
They said once they detected Indian aircraft were releasing weapons, even before those planes crossed the border, the rule changed from just deterring to actively destroying the threat.
Okay, and this is where the technology comes in, the far-shot tactics.
Precisely, and specifically technology with Chinese origins playing a central role. We're talking about things like the ZDK-03 airborne early warning aircraft. Think of it like an eye in the sky.
Like an AWACS plane.
Essentially, yes. Working together with a powerful active phased array radar from their ground-based HQ-9P air defense system, this combination apparently gave them the ability to spot the Indian jets at very long distances.
And then share that information.
Exactly. Share it in real time via data link with their fighter jets, the J-10Cs, and the JF-17s.
Okay, so paint the picture. Indian jets launch standoff weapons, maybe thinking they're safe, outside the range of direct threat.
Right. But the ZDK-03 sees them. It passes the targeting data to the Pakistani fighters. They then launch their own long-range air-to-air missiles, specifically the PL-15.
The PL-15, what's special about that?
Well, a couple of things. It's got a very long range, obviously, but the really clever part, according to the reports, is how its radar seeker works. It apparently stays inactive, cold, for most of its flight.
Meaning the Indian jets wouldn't detect it coming.
Not from the missile itself initially. It relies on guidance updates from the ZDK-03 via that data link. Then, only when it gets close, maybe within about 20 kilometers of the target, its own powerful AAA radar seeker activates.
20 kilometers. That's not much warning time at all, especially against a fast missile.
Extremely little. Plus, you have the Pakistani J-10Cs likely using their electronic warfare pods to jam or confuse the Indian aircraft's radars and warning receivers. So the Indian pilot might get a radar warning only at the very last second, if at all, against a missile coming in at maybe Mach 4. Very little chance to react.
Wow. That's a completely different kind of air combat than, say, the close-in dogfighting, where the maneuverability of something like India's Su-30 MKI is supposed to shine.
Exactly. That super maneuverability is almost irrelevant if you're being targeted and potentially hit from well beyond visual range. The reported 6-to-0 kill ratio from May 7th, if accurate, really speaks volumes about how effective this integrated far-shot approach was.
And Pakistan apparently expressed surprise themselves at how unprepared India seemed.
Yeah, reports suggested they were surprised by perceived gaps in Indian electronic warfare capabilities, maybe situational awareness regarding missile ranges, tactical coordination, effective command and control in that specific encounter.
And the core of this capability, it seems to be this integration of different systems, largely from China.
That's what stands out, yes. It's not just one piece of hardware. It's the early warning plane, the ground radar, the fighter jets, the long-range missiles, the data links, possibly the electronic warfare, all working together as a cohesive system. That level of integration derived from Chinese tech seems to have given the PAF a decisive edge in this type of engagement.
And that has wider implications, doesn't it, beyond just this conflict?
Oh, absolutely. This could really shift how people view Chinese military technology, not just as, a cheaper option, but as sophisticated, highly effective integrated systems capable of competing with and even defeating advanced Western platforms. We might see countries rethinking their defense purchases, looking more seriously at these kinds of integrated solutions from China. It's potentially a big boost for their defense exports and global image.
So thinking strategically then, what was Pakistan trying to achieve with this quite forceful operation? And what are the bigger ripples from this?
Well, the primary goal seems pretty clear: deterrence. They likely wanted to send a very strong message to India that future aggression would come at a very high cost. Inflicting significant pain, particularly on the Indian Air Force, raises the stakes considerably for any future Indian military planning.
Making them think twice.
Exactly. And degrading India's air capabilities, even temporarily, has strategic value. Longer term, you could even see economic effects.
How so?
Increased regional instability, or even just the perception of it, isn't great for attracting foreign investment, especially in manufacturing, which India is really pushing for. Companies might get nervous. And as we said, the success here could really boost the global brand awareness and desirability of Chinese military systems. Value for money, yes, but now also proven integrated quality and effectiveness.
And internationally, India didn't seem to get a huge wave of support rushing in.
Not really, no. The US and Europe seem to be mostly watching, observing. Russia offered to mediate, which is something, but not exactly taking sides strongly with India.
So Pakistan felt they could act without triggering major international backlash.
It appears so. By the time their army chief announced the end of the operation that was around midday Beijing time on May 10th, they had arguably hit their main military objectives and made their point without letting it spiral into a wider, uncontrollable war.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Summing up our deep dive today, what we've seen is a, frankly, surprisingly effective and quite assertive military response from Pakistan to India's earlier actions.
Definitely. And a response that seems to have heavily relied on advanced military technology, a lot of it sourced from China, employed using some innovative tactics, particularly that far-shot air combat strategy we discussed.
Highlighting that integration aspect again.
Yes, the integration seems key. The May 7th air battle looks like a pivotal moment, maybe exposing some vulnerabilities in the Indian Air Force's approach and clearly boosting Pakistan's confidence.
And the potential long-term consequences, strategic, economic, for both countries and maybe the whole region, could be pretty significant.
They could indeed. And it really underscores the growing importance and battlefield effectiveness of these highly integrated defense systems. It might really be changing the game and perhaps shifting global views on where the leading edge of military tech is coming from.
Which leaves us the final thought for you, the listener. India has vowed retaliation. Pakistan has shown its new capabilities. What could the next chapter in this look like? And maybe more broadly, what does this whole episode tell us about the shifting balance of power in the region and the real-world impact of these integrated defense systems, especially as we see technologies potentially like these Chinese systems proliferating globally? Definitely something to keep thinking about.